This is Blood and Cancer, the official podcast of MDedge Hematology Oncology. I am the voice of MDedge Podcasts, Nick Andrews. Welcome to episode 70 of Blood and Cancer, the official podcast of MDedge Hematology Oncology. I'm joined this week, as I always am, by the editor-in-chief of MDedge, Heme Onc, Dr. David Henry. And Dr. Henry, we've got some melancholy news, a little bit of nostalgic news to start this show, and that is that Clinical Correlation, the segment with Dr. Ilana Yurkowitz, is officially ending new installments. And so she sent us her finale, her farewell. I would like to say right off the top, welcome to the show. Dr. Yurkowitz will be back as a co-host and as a guest throughout the future, but Clinical Correlation is ending. So we look back just real quick on all of the things that she did, just jaw-dropping at her ability to
as our
find
audience
things.
knows, she's a rising fellow at Stanford and going to make wonderful contributions in this world of hematology oncology. And she certainly has made contributions to our understanding of clinical correlations, which has wowed me, as I've said all along each week, that she comes up with yet another idea on interactions with patients, good, bad, how to handle it, what it feels like being on the doctor's side, on the patient's side. She really is in tune with what it's like to be a clinical oncologist, hematologist, and I'm sure we're going to see great things from her.
Absolutely, and we're going to check back in with her. She'll be back on Blood and Cancer in the interim. Of course, she hosted a 3-part series on difficult conversations. She's very good at taking a second and understanding what's going on around her and taking that snapshot and incorporating it into teaching. So I feel guilty that we've put her at the end of Blood and Cancer. It's a great way to wrap up the show, but I think that for her final episode, she deserves the floor. So we're going to start off this episode with Clinical Correlation. When we come back, we'll tease our guest. He is one of the hosts and perhaps the most famous physician podcaster on planet Earth. Dr. Matt Watto is our guest this week.
Yes, right.
He is something else. The Curbsiders has swept medicine off its feet over the last 24 months. It's so much information, so much education, and what a great guest he was. But he is coming up after Clinical Correlation. Let's start it off one last time with Dr. Ilana Yurkowitz. When we come back, Dr. Matt Watto and Dr. David Henry, and we'll talk about some other things as well.
Very good.
This week on Clinical Correlation, a special closing segment. I'm Dr. Ilana Yurkowitz, and this is Clinical Correlation, a segment about the human side of hematology and oncology care. Today is a special segment for me. It's my last time doing Clinical Correlation on a regular basis. When we started Blood and Cancer in January of 2019, editor Mary Ellen Schneider asked if I would consider doing a closing segment, and I was thrilled to brainstorm the idea for Clinical Correlation, my segment on the human side of hematology and oncology care. It was based loosely off the column I wrote for MDedge, Hard Questions, which also grappled with patient interactions, ethics, and philosophies of dealing with serious illness. Patients are what drew me to this field and keep me going every day. When we started this podcast in January of 2019, I had no idea how long it would last and how wonderful the reception would be. Over this past year and change, I've heard from many listeners who appreciated what we're doing and for whom my segment resonated. Thank you for getting in touch. I am honored to reach you. It's been an absolute privilege to work with Dr. David Henry, Nick Andrews, Mary Ellen Schneider, Kathy Scarbeck, and everyone else involved in creating this show and keeping us on the air. Thank you. To be honest, I never expected to create content for over a year, but a year and 4 months is how long it's been. I've enjoyed making each and every one of these episodes. While this will be an end to my regular segment, I will not be a stranger to the show, coming back now and again as a guest or simply a longtime friend of Blood and Cancer. On a personal note, I am embarking on my last year of fellowship, and I can't wait to put the finishing touches on my training and prepare for the next steps. I think it's only fitting to close this segment with a story. I've been doing video visits with patients lately due to COVID-19, and recently saw a patient with AML in remission doing really well. I was there to give him the initial good news, and now for the long-term follow-up. He said he remembered our initial conversation well, and that was one of the best conversations of his life. It wasn't just the remission, although of course that was a big part, but the way I celebrated his good news and seemed to be as invested in his future as he was. It meant a lot to me to hear him say that. On that note, I thank you for being invested in me and in this segment. Stay safe, and until we meet again.
Welcome back to Blood and Cancer. I am Nick Andrews, and I'm joined by the editor-in-chief of Dr. David Henry. And Dr. Henry, is one of those moments where you look back and it's a milestone, and we say goodbye to new episodes of Clinical Correlation with Dr. Yurkowitz. And just such a great contribution from her. But we have a superstar, the superstar, perhaps, of medical podcasting, Dr. Matt Watto, coming up. And he, like you and I, are located in the Metro Philly area, and he's a hospitalist. He's obviously a podcast extraordinaire. The interview was great, and it's really interesting to see what's going on in hospitals in areas that are hard hit.
Well, as you just said, as I get my last comments in about Ilana, I think we may have her back with some best of. So yes. We have everything all in the can, as they say, in showbiz, which I'm learning more and more all about it from you, Nick, and others in podcasting. So we will have her back for those legacy shows and some new content down the road. But on to Matt Watto. So what a wonderful find he was and is. He's at our hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Hospital. And I got to meet him soon after he arrived and heard something about he does a podcast. Really? What's it all about? Well, it's called the Curbsiders. And for our audience, with a plural, Curbsiders. You can find them on their website, curbsiders.com. And I said, well, Matt, does anybody listen to this? Oh, yeah, I have 100,000 listeners. What? So he's extremely well known. What he does, he has a whole group that does it. Very talented, very professional. Don't ask for a dime from it. They just do it for the love of the game. Very important for the practicing internal medicine caregivers, who of whatever sort, kidney, liver,
right.
lung, blood and cancer sometimes. So they cover the waterfront. Very practical, very useful information each and every week on the Curbsiders.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exactly what, the name suggests. It's curbside consulting. They do hot takes on new journal articles. They're doing a good job covering COVID for clinicians and internists. You and him do have a relationship. You go back a way. So if you're a Curbsiders listener, I think at some point we're going to expect to see Dr. David Henry on the show to talk about hematology and oncology care. That hopefully is coming down the pike.
I look forward to that. But what I did with him was I said, all right, we're going to turn the tables on you. Instead of you interviewing people, I'm interviewing you. And the reason we did is, as we're recording this toward the middle of May in 2020, COVID is something that we have to deal with every day. And so he's a hospitalist, and he just came off a week on service being an attending on a floor interacting with COVID patients. And so we go through what's it like? How do you handle the patient with all this gear on? Are you with or without the resident? How do you then round? Because sitting at nurses' stations or in conference rooms doesn't happen. And how do you teach? And so he had some interesting observations on how to do that, how to make it count, how to not make it boring and just more Zoom and electronics all the time, and stay safe and help patients get better. We're starting to see a level off and down as we record this in Philadelphia, and so he goes through that as well.
Yeah, no, and he is as good as it gets at keeping things bite-sized, but also incorporating conversation. So that's coming up. I do have some personal news to disclose myself.
Let's hear it.
Yes, it's very exciting. So I've kept this under wraps for years. I have been involved with a surgical resident at an area hospital in Philadelphia, and she and I are engaged to be married as of January 2020, and today is match day for cardiothoracic surgery. So congratulations to all the cardiothoracic surgery matches for fellowship, and congrats to my fiance, Dr. Linden. It's the first time that we've ever come out in public about it, but I feel like it's the time to do that. We are headed to North Carolina, the Appalachian Mountains, and Wake Forest University.
Well, congratulations to you and to her, and it's very exciting news, and it's going to be an exciting time as we get out of this epidemic and then settle down, as I'm sure we will one day. So
yes.
Good luck, and I'm sure it's a very exciting future.
Yes, and we greatly appreciate that. And again, congrats to everybody, and best of luck to anybody going through the match process for any sort of fellowship out there. Okay, without any further ado, we'll wrap up this episode by, I don't know, maybe giving it to the most famous podcaster in medicine in the world. Please welcome to the show Dr. David Henry and your interview with Dr. Matt Watto. You're listening to Blood and Cancer.
Stay tuned. I'm Dr. David Henry, your host today. You're listening to the podcast entitled Blood and Cancer. And each week on Thursday mornings, we air a new show on iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts from. And you can also go see us on our electronic website journal page called mdedge.com/hematology-oncology. And so I'm delighted this week to be talking with someone who knows all about this and is paving the way with podcasts live and streaming and video and just audio. Dr. Matt Watto, who's a assistant professor of medicine here at Pennsylvania Hospital for a little bit longer before he gets a little closer to home with his commute and his new job. And he is, of course, the host of the Curbsiders. And Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I want to point out to the audience that my main academic appointment is at Kashlak Memorial Hospital, which is a fake hospital that really we all work at.
Okay, I like it, and I want to continue giving you a plug because I'm a devoted listener to the Curbsiders, and so for listeners, it's curbsiders.com is the web page. You can sign up, I guess, on iTunes or wherever people get podcasts, Matt.
Yes, that's correct.
And each week, and you always ask the other co-hosts to say what it is we do. So I'm going to ask you to give that tagline. So what do the Curbsiders do on their podcast each week? What's it all about?
Well, we use expert interviews, someone like yourself, to bring listeners clinical pearls, practice-changing knowledge, and bad puns, which are, I'm not the pun person, so don't expect any from me today, but we do have, our team is very into puns. And whenever we have fake cases, there's always, like the most recent show, the name was Alcoholic, and it was a show on alcohol withdrawal.
Well, so, from listening, you're the straight man, so I'll do all the jokes today, and hopefully you'll laugh. And the reason, of course, we're having Matt on our show today is he's a busy expert hospitalist at our hospital here at Pennsylvania Hospital, and we're recording this at the end of the first full week of May in 2020, and of course, COVID is really ongoing. We may be seeing in Philadelphia, living in the shadow of New York. I think we were a little better prepared because we were scared stiff by New York. It might be peaking, but still very busy. And Matt's been attending on the wards, COVID and non-COVID, and so he'll give some insights on this world going forward. But as he always does with Curbsiders, he goes a little personal first, and so I'm going to do it to him. And Matt is married with a wonderful wife and 4 children of various young ages. So what's it like at home during this COVID era? How are you schooling? What are the diversions, favorite TV shows, moving? How are you keeping yourself, your wife, and the kids busy after you get home?
Like everybody, we've been thinking a lot about this. So I think I have a good answer for you. First of all, I will say my wife is an absolute saint because while she always runs the household and I pretty much do the podcasting and my job at the hospital, but my wife she's now, not only is she, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the house, and she's now teaching 4 children on a day-to-day basis. So it's been pretty tough from that perspective, sure. But we're lucky, I should say, that we just try to keep perspective the fact that we have high-speed internet, plenty of food, and the ability to stay home, which is not the case for everyone in this country. So we're just trying to do that, and then try to do some fun things. Like, for instance, today it's kind of a rainy day, so we're going to watch a movie with the family, and I think we're watching Parent Trap, the Lindsay Lohan version.
That's great. I love that.
And the idea has been that the kids want to watch movies that we watched when we were kids. And a funny thing about that, Dr. Henry, PG in the 1980s and 1990s is much different than a PG movie nowadays. Political correctness was much different. And I think The Bad News Bears, the original, is like a PG rating. I knew not to show that one to my kids, but there's they've learned some choice language, and we're just like, well, they're not going to be in school, so they're only saying it around us.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm way older than you, and PG in my era there was no 4-letter, 8-letter, there was no words except the King's English. So it's we've certainly, and no one saw anything above the ankle or below the neck. So we've certainly progressed maybe a lot.
Yeah.
How old are your kids?
They're between the ages of 3. So I have a 3.5 and 8.5. So a bunch of them level up in the fall. And so I have a daughter who's 3.5, and then the boys are 5, 5.5, 7, and 8.5. And they are just constantly beating on one another, playing Legos, reading books.
Well, you are married to a saint. I hope you know.
I do.
And before we move on to our medical part of the show, my daughter teaches first grade in the Philadelphia suburbs, 23 6-year-olds, and that's going to, and of course they're off and they're all teaching from home and Zooming. She's learned something with Zooming with them. She mutes them, of course, because 6-year-olds, you got to keep them quiet. They quickly Googled and learned out how to unmute. And so they start chiming in and yelling at each other. And she's, as her hands full, keeping them quiet, but she's figured that out because she's a little techer savvy than they are. But, I don't see this going away, COVID era, anytime soon. And Labor Day is going to come and we go back to school. And I just can't see parents allowing 23 6-year-olds to be in the same room day after day. They're thinking about doing 5 the first hour, 5 the second hour, 5 the third hour. So, I'm not sure how parents like you are going to face if we don't come up with some great advances going back to school in the fall.
It's evolving. I think what our teachers have been doing is a lot of pre-recorded videos and they'll maybe once or twice a week, they jump on a Zoom with the whole class because of that problem, the over talking problem on Zoom. You've been on conference calls, right? Where people forget to unmute them or to mute themselves. And then you hear on like their car keys jingling and the air conditioner and all that.
Or things they didn't want to hear.
Yeah.
Well, so it's an adventure, and I hope we get through it. And as you say, many of us are lucky enough to be getting through this, and many are not as lucky. So we hope that changes very soon. So let's go to the hospital. So you're coming off, I think, is the way your teams are working is a week on and a week off? So
yes.
Describe what the services are like in terms of your hours, and then we'll get into what's it like taking care of the patients.
I will say that the hospital, I think, like many hospitals in the country, people just, when the city and the state shut things down, the hospital volume dropped way, way down. And I think that was initially actually more terrifying because we were sitting here seeing what's happening in New York, just terrified when it comes to us, is it gonna overwhelm us? But it was this weird disconnect because we're sitting there not with many patients to take care of, and then we're not really able to teach, or there's not students around. We would have had all this time in a different world. We'd have had all this time to actually be doing the kind of teaching we normally don't have time for. Yeah. So that made things unusual. But yeah, we're rotating on and off the services. We have not had to act as intensivists, even though that we put out a show talking about ventilators, because there was a time where I was worried that I was going to have to act as an intensivist, and fortunately that hasn't happened. And now the schedule is it hasn't changed the hours that much for us. I think we're luckier than some other places that were really overwhelmed with the volume, because your hours kind of track, as a hospitalist, that your hours track with the volume largely.
Can you describe, you're recently coming off service, so maybe give us what your day was like when you were on service in terms of how many patients, how many sick, not sick, and how you interacted with the house staff and how you interacted with the patient.
Yeah, that's been a learning experience, because normally I would walk around and see every patient, usually sit on the bed as I'm talking to the patient. There's a lot of contact, which is intentional because you're trying to connect with your patient and make them get the sense that you're not trying to leave the room as soon as possible. And now when starting, I guess it was maybe now 6 weeks ago or more, we've been wearing goggles in every room. We've been wearing masks. The patients have been wearing masks. When you're not examining the patient, you're standing at least 6 feet away from them. And usually you're if it's a patient who has COVID, you're wearing a face shield and gowns and gloves. So the rounding has been a lot different. I mean,
and you're in that room yourself without the house officer.
Without the house officer. A lot of the times the house officer will stand outside the room at the door, and also wearing, their level of PPE that they need to be outside the room there. And they're just watching me interact with the patient, and I'll ask them, hey, did you have any other questions, for the patient? I'm trying to involve them in rounds as best I can, but they're at the door, which is like 20 feet away from the patient. And that's the best. At least the patient is able to see them and I'm seeing them, and we can talk about the plan with the patient. I really dislike just sitting at the nurse's station and running through the list. I feel like it's in many ways inefficient, and it just doesn't let us be at the bedside. So even if it's quicker at the bedside with the resident at the door, that's what I've been doing. And then we'd run the list several times throughout the day.
So that would be where the teaching would occur. You'd get that rounding done, and then everybody would sit in some social distancing with masks on and talk.
Yes. And I also like to just think and remind people so much what I learned in the past few years doing the podcast and talking to professional educators is that a lot of teaching occurs by things that we don't say, just like the hidden curriculum stuff. So I'm trying to set an example for how you can listen to your patients, interact with them. Most of the questions, because there's not too many mysteries when someone has COVID-19, I'm mostly just asking the patients about their life and what their life was like before they had this illness and what they'll be going back to, and trying to figure out who's this person, where did they come from, where are they going when they leave here.
As an oncologist, I get a lot of clues from the patient's eyes and facial expressions or interaction with their wife, mother, son sitting nearby. And so that's all missing now. And I'm having to learn new ways to get visual clues. Are you seeing kind of a sadness in the eyes or a fear? What are you seeing in faces?
I think sometimes the patients are not wearing masks. They're all supposed to be wearing masks, but unless I'm getting right in there, I'm not too much of a stickler about it for what that's worth. But I think you can still get a sense about how the patient moves. I always like to look the first time I examine somebody, do a full exam, including looking at the patient's feet and things like that, because I think that you can get a lot of information about how well someone's cared for by looking at their feet, because especially older, I'm thinking of an older couple we had. If you have an older couple in their 80s that can't reach their feet, and if their toenails are painted and their feet look clean and dry and moisturized, someone's taking good care of that person. I don't know if that's an eponym.
That's a great tip.
I don't know if anyone's taken that eponym yet, but I would love to come up with like the Kashlak sign or something like that. Or we can think of something better than that.
We'll think about, because it's now yours, so you own it, and you need to name it. Have you seen anything, speaking of house staff and teaching, you're a seasoned attending now and they're trainees. Do you see fear, anxiety? Are they jumping in where they shouldn't, not paying attention to PPE? What are you seeing in the range of house staff you've worked with of how they're doing?
I will say that there's been people have not been directly vocal to me, probably because it's hard to be vocal to your attending in a negative fashion. But I have seen a fair amount of things on Twitter with house staff asking about hazard pay, and especially house staff in New York. There was a doctor in New York, Colleen Farrell, who she writes articles, sometimes get published in major newspapers and publications. And she was kind of calling out her home institution about not feeling safe and protected, not feeling supported, that the volume there was much higher, and she was not feeling safe and protected. And I guess the administration, there was an email that was leaked about the administration having somewhat of a callous response to the residents complaining about that. I think our house staff at Kashlak have been very brave throughout this, and they still are providing direct care to patients. We're trying to, as the attendings, once usually the initial admission, the residents seeing the patient, but then from then on, we try to keep the residents out of the room as much as we can. We get paid much more we get paid much better than they do to be
Sure.
risking ourselves in that manner. So I think that's appropriate that we protect them. They do so much. I mean, the hospitals like literally run on their backs. That's not the teaching hospitals anyway.
That's so true. I'm very proud of our house. You and I share the same house, Dave. I'm very proud of them. Actually, a shout out to several of them who do our show notes for our interviews like this with thought leaders and experts in various fields of hematology, oncology, or taking care of the world like you are in the hospital. And I think they've the pressure has been enormous sometimes because it's a fear of the unknown. You can't see this thing. Did I forget? Did I touch something? Did I touch my face? And so I think they've been very brave and front line. And, you know, sadly, this is their turn. Those of a certain age, you don't remember Legionnaires. You were probably 2 years old. And that was my first experience intubating someone who I didn't know why these Legionnaires were dying. And then we got it. Oh, hey, they're Legionnaires. And then HIV came along. And this one is worldwide. And it's not a demographic, it's everybody. So this is the most frightening, and certainly in my experience. But then, of course, if you read going back generations and generations, hundreds of years, this is just our turn. This happens every several hundred years and wipes out a certain portion of the planet, sadly, until we figure it out. So I think we're in the best situation ever, highest technology, highest industry, rising to the occasion. So I'm hoping we find something soon. What are you hearing in that regard?
There was something, I want to say it's called it's like the CIDRAP, CIDRAP. I might be remembering that exact acronym, but there was a bunch of people who study pandemics who recently put out some modeling about how long they think this is going to go on. That was the most recent thing I've seen come out in the past week in the Journal Watch that I follow. And they predicted 3 models. Maybe model 1 was like, there's a big peak this fall, and then it starts to taper off over the next 18 to 24 months. There's one where we have continuous peaks and valleys for 18 to 24 months. And then there's one where it just kind of smolders on and there's no discernible peaks, but we're still kind of posturing, not returning completely to the way things were before for 18 to 24 months. But I think at this time, without any cure in sight or vaccine being any closer than the 18 months or so, I think that's realistic that it might be something like that. And as educators, I don't think I did a great job of answering your question before, like how are we providing teaching? I am trying to make shows like crazy. That's why we're expanding into video, and we're also in live video specifically where we can interact with people. And I think most medical schools and residency programs have moved their curriculums online, and we're now all, fortunately, as you mentioned, technology is in a place where we have tools to harness. We just need to figure out the most effective ways to put them into place to engage people.
Well, you do a phenomenal job on the Curbsiders of doing that. All of us in hematology oncology, the typical audience for this blood and cancer podcast, need to know our internal medicine. So what do you have coming up? I think you did mention some live stream and some other shows. Do you have a couple of topics that are coming up we might mention for the audience?
Sure. We have some episodes coming up. There's a fatigue episode, one on medical myths. Actually, probably by the time this comes out, fatigue will have aired. There's a medical myths episode. Those are some that talks that would have been given at ACP. And since ACP wasn't able to have the full conference this year, we had those speakers virtually on. And then from the Society for General Internal Medicine conference, we actually just did a podcast on homeless healthcare and another podcast on trauma-informed care, which are topics not unrelated. And we'll continue to do our COVID Cakes show, which is essentially a roundup of headlines related to COVID-19 with an epidemiologist, Rahul Ganatra, who helps us break things down. He's an internist and epidemiologist who really can break things down in an understandable way. So we're trying to learn critical appraisal and keep up with COVID. And then, of course, we'll be making all sorts of shows like ILD and hyperthyroidism and some musculoskeletal stuff. Eventually, we'll get back to musculoskeletal.
Yes, please, I have to keep myself up to date. And to remind our listeners, as the Curbsiders, I always tell people who I'm telling it's so it's plural, curbsiders.com. And I suspect your shows are archived so they can go back and find the old shows in the past.
Sure.
And I think we'll finish by mentioning, since you and I share a common theme, we're both former Air Force doctors, there was a flyover in Philadelphia and in the country a couple of weeks ago. I've seen the Thunderbirds. I've seen the Blue Angels, these 6-member teams. I've never seen them together. And it was just phenomenal. And I'm not sure if people noticed who saw this across the country, the Blue Angels did the missing man formation. They had a trailer come around, and it was actually much more moving. The news picked this up. And even it was much more moving than people thought. Had you seen them before this?
I did not. I was in the hospital and I heard them fly over, but I was in the midst of gowned up, and yeah, I was not able to make it out there.
Well, it's archived all over the place at our hospital, and of course anywhere on the news feed. So, well, I want to end our show and thank you, Matt, for joining us, and thank you for all you do. There again, we've been talking to Matt Watto, who is a hospitalist here at Pennsylvania Hospital, assistant clinical professor of medicine, and he is the host of the wonderful show Curbsiders, where you can find it at curbsiders.com. And you've been listening to Blood and Cancer. We are every Thursday morning, and you can find us on mdedge.com/hematology-oncology. And we thank you very much for listening. Matt, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.